Boom. We are alive, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. I wasn't here on Monday. I smashed up my leg dancing too late at night. I guess I think I'm like 20 years old still. Remember that you are capable of anything you put your mind to. It just might be difficult. So I'm going to dive in today. I got some thoughts I want to go over about the markets. If you can give me a thumbs up so I know that the live stream is going smoothly. Every time I take a little bit of time off like this, oh yeah, there we go. There's a thumbs up rolling in. Okay, awesome. That means everything's going smooth. So what we're going to do is start off looking at Bitcoin. I've been following this trading range for quite some time. We dipped below it. We've seen this in the past. This is usually where the spring evolves. And we see enough volume coming in that there's a high likelihood that this was actually the bottom. Now, one of the things that's concerning to me and has been leaving me overly pessimistic is shit like this. Hungary's population sees the sharpest decline in almost 150 years. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but I spend probably way too much time reading scientific and medical journals. I've been doing that for a very long time. If you recognize any of the podcast guests we had in the past, they were PhDs in biology, PhDs in physics, astrophysics. I love talking to the fringe scientists because they were usually the first to discover what was truth early. Now, when I start to find stuff like this in multiple countries, it is very disconcerting. One of the reasons being is the population growth over the last longer than my lifetime has been nothing but considerable growth. Since the early 1930s, when we went off the gold standard or slowly started to go into fractional reserve banking, the amount of debt that each family could take out was also partially in line with how many new people were being born. Currently, around the world, for some unknown reason, that has changed dramatically in the last 2 years. Birth rates have taken massive hits over the 50-year moving average, and same with mortality rates in the last 2 years. Now, I don't want to fall too far down that rabbit hole. I'll leave you up to your own interpretations of whatever data and science you think is valuable research for you to do. But this is very pessimistic because what happens when there's less people being born and potentially more people dying? That's where productivity comes from. It comes from people. Wealth comes from new people generating new ideas that bring these new ideas to the top of the froth and provide something valuable back to the community. As an entrepreneur, this is something I am extremely excited about. And when we see these massive declines, you have to start to question not just why it's happening, but the potential effects on the economy. It's actually extraordinarily deflationary to have people die and or not be born, because that means whatever wealth is out there generally goes more into the fewer hands that are available. Now, we've known this for a long time, that most of the time wealth accumulates in fewer hands. This is known as the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule. If you do not know what that is, I highly suggest spending your time doing an extra little bit of research and following down this line as well. It's an interesting conversation. Nature itself does this. The biggest mass within each solar system usually ends up being the center star, and therefore then it accumulates the most mass. Jupiter, actually right behind the star, gets the most asteroids and comets hitting it. Same with the sun's powerful geomagnetics draw that same type of conclusion. So we know that in nature, the biggest thing attracts more things. This is just a rule of the way things kind of work. So it's not that nature is unfair, but it is by its own course. It functions that way. So we don't want to try to step out and get out of line with nature. But the point of this is, how do we grow with less people and less new ideas coming to table? A lot of this growth over the last 100 years, again, has been due to monetary printing and debt going into the hands of ever-growing numbers of people. And for the very first time, at least in my lifetime, those numbers have dropped off dramatically. Again, both in the birth and death rates. However you want to do your own research into that, that's up to you. Now, the next thing I wanted to look at here is, let's start with the dollar index. We'll bring open, here we have the RSI on the bottom and the DXY on the top. We do see some divergence here between these 2 points, bearish divergence. So how low does US dollar come? Now, I suspect that it will touch the top of the trading range. We may have been in a reaccumulation range for the dollar, which into itself might make sense, but it's very likely that the US Federal Reserve is going to find some type of lenient somewhere, whether it's in printing or in interest rates. It's also important to remember that if all those people are no longer having more children, or more people then are also dying, this will have a dramatically deflationary effect on the economy. So if you're trying to battle interest rates, you know one of the best way to do it? Just remove a bunch of people from spending. Ta-da! Mission accomplished, ladies and gentlemen. So we are meeting headwinds here that are very difficult to try to comprehend, and being a little bit pessimistic is important. I want to go back to the Bitcoin chart here. I think it's likely that what we see is a final run up here to around around $28,000, the bottom of the trading range here. And this will become the ever important moment, because if we run up to around $28,000 to $30,000 and can't close above that, we'll be coming down to like 10 to maybe even $8,000 Bitcoin. So be prepared for that if we cannot get back above $28,000. If for some reason, due to these massively deflationary headwinds also coming into play, and they change their mind and we make it above 30, 31, 32, probably more importantly, it's very likely that this market will continue. Now, I'm very worried about headlines like this, because if you see 150 years is a long time. It's more than twice my age, multiple times my age, in fact, 5 times longer than I've been alive effectively. So for the 5 times longer than I've been alive, we see the lowest or the sharpest decline in population in countries like Hungary. We have to assume that this is not just Hungary that's taking place. And again, you can find data like this on multiple government websites. Again, I'm not going to try to predict a cause or effect. It's just not my niche per se. But in the relationship to economics, this has dramatic effects. What that dramatic effect looks like yet, I don't know, because we've never seen it in any 5 times longer than I've been alive. We don't know what that will do. We don't have a clue. I could make some guesses, but ultimately, I would want to be a little optimistic, because the lack of people either being born and a higher number of people also dying, again, massively deflationary, but also it reduces the amount of potential that the human species has, because in every million people, you're going to have one person that comes up with an invention that will change the way we live our lives. And that's important. If those people are no longer being born, where does technical evolution come from? It comes from new people with new ideas. So this is a dramatic effect, and I don't know how to calculate it in. In fact, this is one of the most concerning things I have ever seen in my entire lifetime, because I don't know what that means. So I want to be overly optimistic, because I love this technology. But again, if we do not close back above $28,000 here, we're going to come much lower. We could come much, much lower. This economic system is not held up by anything necessarily. It's basically all bullshit and lies. So because we've been held up in the market by BS and nonsense, you want to be a little concerned about how many zombie companies are there that exist in something like the S&P 500. Seen a very dramatic rebound in the S&P 500. Again, currently up 13%. And on the candle wicks right now, we're actually starting to veer in to the previous reversal right here as well. So this is important, because it's the potential for a new trading range taking place at any one of these areas above. Kind of poorly drawn lines, but I'll give you an example of where the trading range takes place. Often you will have larger trading ranges in something like this, especially if the market is trying to find a way to cool itself off, drag as much money out of the profits as possible, and make sure that people have some sort of trust and faith in the governance, because it's been declining dramatically. I think a lot of polls 13% of the people trust their government. That means the government is not trusted. We lost trust in them a long time ago. And they're kind of the social contract layer. And when people start to lose faith in the social contract layer, it means we're usually pretty damn close to some sort of revolution. We see this in multiple countries. Sri Lanka, Panama, Pakistan, Iran, all over the world, we're seeing people who are totally out of line with their current government and institutions. So, there's a very real reason to be extraordinarily pessimistic in these times. And I'm a huge fan of Bitcoin because I aim at more decentralization of power. The governance structure is clearly broken. There's more than one example where, for instance, if you had killed someone through scientific fraud, you'd end up in jail. But if a company does it, they write it in as a business expense. So we are in probably one of the worst times in human history for a multitude of things that are taking place right now. I've talked about this in one of my previous videos. Again, when we looked at the BMJ's article around the level of scientific fraud that's taking place, not just in the medical literature, but across every field. If there is a more profitable answer than a simple, unprofitable answer, these companies are always fighting for the most profitable answer and hiding and burying the simple, basically unprofitable answer. And this is a point I think that we will look back in history for much longer than I would probably like to anticipate. So as bullish as I want to be here, we're at a very important part, not just in our financial system, but probably in humanity as we know it. So looking for a close above 29,000, 28,000. And if we can't do that, we're coming back down low. So just be prepared for that. I do, again, suspect that we will get some type of relief rally back up to that $28,000 area. But again, with just the pessimistic news out there, it's hard to see how we can grow if we are losing so many people. Ethereum's had a nice rebound up to the second regression line, which is quite nice. We're finding a fair amount of resistance here. Again, what I suspect is that we will see some type of trading range form, something like this, where we see a longer term accumulation take place. Matic has had a very nice bounce. Again, you can see the bottom of the trading range that we broke out of down here. So we have closed above that. So we are in a bullish scenario. It's very likely we could see upwards of $1.50 for something like Matic. This would be equivalent to Bitcoin going to around $30,000 before coming down potentially even lower. So there's a lot of reason to believe at least bullish temporarily, maybe for the next few weeks. We can see some run-ups in many of these tokens. Again, you see almost all green on the right-hand side of my screen here. Avalanche at $24. Take a quick look here. Again, breaking out of the top of the trading range and holding above it multiple times. Same with Solana. Actually, Solana is a little bit weaker. We have not broken out of the top of the trading range yet. We are still stuck below that. Although Solana had a big hack on some of the wallets today, so this makes a little bit of sense. Uniswap is another kind of fun way to look at this. I think you saw this nice, beautiful trading range take place down here at the very bottom. Again, you can see a low volume spring, which is quite nice, and then multiple closes above that trading range. So it's very likely we could see a bull market continuation here. Again, just remember that if we don't get back above for $28,000, it's going to reverse everything, because the trust, not just in the social contract from the governments, also comes from the trust in the nature of this entire ecosystem. They're all interrelated, because on the other side of the trade for Uniswap is Ethereum and Bitcoin and USDT. So if we start to lose faith in these things, they could all come down dramatically. We could be dealing with a once in 1,000-year event. That's still what I think. I don't think it's just once in 150 years. I think we could be witnessing a once in a multiple 1,000-year event effectively. So it's important to keep that in the background of your mind here. So being well positioned, how you manage your portfolio is really up to you. I more often suggest that people don't become traders and just focus on what they're already good at, what they're already doing to generate revenue, make consistent investments over time, and be patient. This is where most of the great yield comes from. It's hard to outpace 200x growth in things like Matic that we had seen over the last few years. And again, in this sector entirely, what's unique is venture capital has really never been opened up at a global scale or to the individual participant in so many countries. So we have the potential for something here to grow way bigger because it doesn't exist anywhere else. There is no market that allows for cross-border transfers on ideas like this in the traditional sector. Like someone in Indonesia can't invest in Netflix because they're just not a participant in that ecosystem. So a lot of the times what you have is investors that can qualify to invest in these larger markets outside of their usual, I guess, residence. And this is a dramatic difference between these markets. Also, one of the reasons why, again, I still believe it can go significantly higher But again, just pay attention that there are yellow and red warning signs within things like population growth. It's not just hungry either. If you are really interested and you are good at doing data research, you don't need to be a scientist to do so, but you need to aggregate lots of data and you need to look at multiple data sets to make sure you're getting some type of clear signal. This is usually called meta-analysis. It is the purest form of scientific data study. We are not looking for just a single randomized controlled trial, because that can lead to all sorts of bullshit, which we have seen in the past. Again, all the Alzheimer's, apparently the literature that they were using has come out and be like, hey, we just wasted billions of dollars on something that was clearly a fraud. Well, for a lot of people that were in that ecosystem, they knew there were clearly red flags, like Elizabeth Holmes. There were red flags all around that shit. So we know that the scientific ecosystem is capable of lying, capable of fraud at an enormous scale, and capable of covering up data. But it's not covered up everywhere. In fact, there are journals who are still true to their nature. I think the British Medical Journal is probably the most renowned and should be the most trustable at this point. Whereas, again, I've spent long before this pandemic started. Again, if you guys have watched my channel, I'm always fascinated by people who lead the current conversation, because they are called pseudoscientists or fake science. Yet just a few years later, when all the people who disagreed with them die, the new science comes out. So right now, what we're witnessing, I think, is a large transition of the understanding of what we're capable of in the scientific conversation. And I think people really need to understand that scientific fraud happens all the time if the answer is more profitable than the simple truth. Like going outside and getting sunshine, doing a little bit of meditation. These have dramatic results on your well-being, yet a doctor very rarely will tell you to do those things anymore. It used to be the bread and butter, right? Get some rest, get some sleep, drink some water, get some sunshine. They no longer recommend that because they need to sell you something to remain profitable. So we're in a day and age where I think we're about to see probably the most dramatic shift in human consciousness and evolution possible. I hope I get to see it in my lifetime, because I believe that on the other side of this, there is a significantly more capable human experience just on the other side. So we could massively outpace and dwarf the numbers that we're at today, because we've been held back so dramatically by this kind of like really short line sight of thinking. So I'm just going to take a look at a few of your guys' thoughts and questions before we go on, and then we'll kind of go from there. Matty G says productivity will skyrocket when robotics and AI replace humans. Yes, we've kind of seen this in the past. Part of the problem is understanding that, this was actually one of my favorite Buckminster Fuller quotes, another fantastic scientist. If you guys have not ever heard of him, around the future of productivity. Let's see if I can find it here quickly in the background. I guess Buckminster Fuller quotes. Let's see here. This might take a minute. Yeah, first off, if you guys don't know who Buckminster Fuller is, I highly suggest doing some more research there as well. Hey, do your own research. It's a crazy thing to think, but it actually pays off dramatically. Anyone that tells you you're not smart enough to understand data, you should ignore them, because they're usually trying to take advantage of you. Where is this? Okay, here we go. This is one of my favorite quotes by Mr. Fuller. He says, "We should do away with the absolutely specious notion that everybody has to earn a living. It is in fact today 1 in 10,000 of us can make a technological breakthrough capable of supporting all the rest. The youth of today are absolutely right in recognizing this nonsense of earning a living. We keep inventing jobs because of this false idea that everybody has to be employed at some kind of drudgery, because according to Malthusian Darwinism, the theory he must justify his right to exist. So we have inspectors for inspectors and people making instruments for inspectors to inspect inspectors' inspections." And we've run into this rather extraordinarily diluted version of human potential, largely due to bureaucracy and misunderstanding. So it's important to remember that there is, I think, a significant more potential for the human species just on the other side of us kind of figuring out how we deal with these conversations. Real PC Benchmark says, "Are we close to a pump considering what is going on with the stock market? Your thoughts?" I think we'll see a rip to around 28,000. That's where the lower bottom of the VPVR is. So on the right-hand side here, you can see that there's a big gap between around 23,000 to 28,000. Usually if there's a big gap like that, we'll move through it pretty quickly. And then also we have the bottom of the trading range here for that previous multiple 300-day cycle, or sorry, not multiple 300 days, but for that 300 to 400-day cycle before we dropped below the trading range. So $28,000, $29,000 is the area to keep an eye on next. Whether we go below or above that will basically be the indicator for what the next 2 years looks like. I bet we go back down. That's fine. I wasn't buying. Okay, cool. Man downplayed that Sol hack pretty hard. Yeah, it was actually not a Sol hack. So if you are that poorly educated about what actually happened, it was a wallet hack, and that's something completely different. Phantom, which is I think the wallet, I would have to look a little bit more deeply, is the wallet that was compromised due to some type of the way the seed phrases were generated. That's not Solana. Again, this is one of the arguments I see, that it's just people don't understand how the technology works. So they come up with blanket statements like Solana was hacked. No, that's not true. Solana was not hacked. Again, one of the reasons you see a very limited price effect from that. It's not had very little to do with Solana, from what I understand. It had everything to do with the way some wallets were generated within the past X amount of days. So I'd have to double check on that specifically, but Solana was not hacked. So we'll just be clear about these sentiments. How much did you see Avalanche going up by? Let's see, we'll take a look at AVAX. AVAX is basically right at the bottom of the trading range. And again, after this, if we continue to close up, a run to around $44, another 100% growth here is quite easily possible. And we see this in stuff like Uniswap as well. It's important to remember that since we were at the bottom of Uniswap in July here, we're up 160, 180, almost 200% to the peak of the candle wick there. So we have seen 200% automatic rallies since July. So we're in an automatic rally phase, but we could still go higher in a lot of these to reach the top of the previous selling primary support here for Uniswap around $12. Let's take a question here. Yeah, I wouldn't just trust people things on Twitter. Like, Twitter is not a valuable news source. You'd actually have to do some research. Let's see here. Yeah. So keep an eye on the $28,000 mark for Bitcoin. Let's go back here. Again, I think it's likely that we rip up to the top of that, and then from there we'll decide if we're going to go up or down, because we're still in what could be the spring of this trading range. And again, it looks like a nice reaccumulation range so far. I still stand by that. But if we can't close above 29,000, I will admit that I was wrong about that assertion. But until then, we're not there yet. Do you have any thoughts on Harmony surviving? Asking, as I'm invested and feel stuck in a trap. Our early entries into Harmony, Matic, Seller, One were all before 2021. So we took profits on most of those at around 10x, and then they went up like 100x. This is where I started to change. Just be patient within a bull market, because we lost out another 10x on top of the 10x on a bunch of these. At this point in time, where something goes, like we're right in the middle of multiple confounding waves. Again, I can't stress to you how important it is to understand what this means if it's correct, right? I'm not saying that the data I have found is correct, but it's interesting data nonetheless. Hungary's population sees the sharpest decline in almost 150 years, and it is not just Hungary. This is across the board. You can find data like this if you look. I highly suggest checking out Chris Martinson from Peak Prosperity. He's got some really cool ideas. He does some great deep dive data research. I love his channel. That's not where I got this from. Ultimately, I try to do my own research each of the time, but there are very few people that I listen to and appreciate, many of which get kicked off the internet. This is one of the downsides of being right and being right early. But again, nonetheless, those are very disturbing signs. This is once in 150 years. Well, how much longer will we go when that continues to decline? Population and growth of markets have almost been tied hand in hand here. So we could be witnessing something that's far beyond my ability to comprehend, let's say. Let's see. Thank you. Would 65 be asked optimistic? Yeah, the first VPVR pressure on AVAX is around $40. So again, I suspect Bitcoin will run to 28,000, and then that will be the deciding factor of whether I was correct in my assertion that we are in a reaccumulation range or not. Because if we can't close above $29,000, everything's going to come down dramatically. And this is something we've looked at with the S&P 500. If we take a very broad spectrum outlook, we're very high up for the S&P 500. Yet we have not formed a trading range. And normally they don't just drop. You will see some type of trading range form. Now, it could just drop dramatically, but again, it's not in the best interest of the Federal Reserve to let that happen for multiple reasons. Because if they lose even more trust than they already have, which is at all-time lows, people will not be happy, and you will see revolution. They go hand in hand. They are not like disconnected ideas. As soon as you have a loss of faith within your governing system and the companies that provide employment, people become very agitated and very aggressive, and you see revolution. That's just a fact of almost nature to some degree. So if we were to drop too low, you would see a total disintegration of the trust in the social contract, which I'm surprised actually hasn't already happened. But it's in their best interest to find a way to keep these numbers up and keep us Wile E. Coyote from looking down before totally falling. But we are very high up based off nothing but bullshit. So again, we've done this in the past where what we do is we compare to the M2 monetary supply. And as you can see, if I scroll out here a little bit, at least since early 2000, the only growth in the market is growth from the monetary supply. Yet here we go, we see the monetary supply has dipped just a little bit, and even the ability to take out more debt off of these interest rates has caused a massive drop, even though the monetary supply itself has not dropped. So we're in a very interesting time. What they do next will be trying to control the stability of the social contract, because if they lose control of that, they lose control of everything. And they don't want that yet. They want to make sure that if they lose control of everything, it's in their hands. So we could see some type of collapse that tries to bring people into US dollar central bank digital currency. This is probably the most likely event, that they try to sucker everybody into, hey, do you see the bank screwed up? It's like Morgan Stanley and Citibank. It's all them. It wasn't the Federal Reserve's fault that inflation was so high, but clearly they're directly related. The inflation of the monetary supply here in orange and the inflation of the S&P 500 are neck and neck. And it's for a reason. It's because the growth of the market as we know it is fake. It's basically all bullshit. So if they were to turn off and try to liquidate their positions, this entire market will come collapsing back down, because there is nothing but farts holding it up at this point. Coda farts hold the market up at this point. Let's see, a few more quick questions before we dive off. Oh, actually, I have a meeting here, so I do have to jump off this. Anyways, we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Bear Family. Give us a thumbs up. Leave your thoughts, comments, questions. I will be back standing like a peg leg while my hip is sore for tomorrow's episode. So we'll see you again, and thank you all for joining us today. I appreciate the support. See you on the next one.